All right, good evening and welcome. I'm Brittany, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore. We're so pleased to welcome Kelsey Ronan in support of CHEVY in the Hole in conversation with Tia Renee Scott. Just a quick reminder about webinar for our attendees. The chat is closed, but you can keep the chat window open as I will be dropping links to purchase CHEVY in the Hole from Literati throughout the event. Q&A is accessible, so please submit your questions. A live transcription is available on your toolbar as well. If you're watching us later on YouTube, links to purchase the book is in the description. A reminder, you can also shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. Most of all, we'd like to thank you for your attendance this evening. And for watching us later on YouTube. And now allow me to introduce tonight's author. Kelsey Ronan grew up in Flint, Michigan. Her work has appeared in Lit Hub, Michigan Quarterly Review, the Kenyon Review, and elsewhere. She lives in Detroit and teaches for Inside Out Literary Arts. CHEVY in the Hole is her first novel. She is joined in conversation by Tia Renee Scott, also known as Tia the Writer, who is the managing editor for Flintside.com, an online news magazine that's dedicated to covering the happenings in Flint, Michigan, with a focus on solutions, journalism, and authentic storytelling. Her work has been published in several online publications, including her own music platform, The Dope Show, and The Goods Media, an online journal from the streetwear brand, Good Boy Clothing. The Flint native and resident lives with her daughter and handy dandy MacBook. And so with that introduction, these introductions, welcome you two. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey, who's going to do a reading from CHEVY in the Hole. And then we will have our wonderful conversation. Again, welcome, and I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Thank you, Literati, for having me. This is very exciting. And Tia, we'll get into it, but I'm so excited it's you. I'm so excited I get to talk to you tonight. So I'm just gonna read a couple pages from the first chapter. Just as like a content warning, the book does begin with a heroin overdose, but like no spoilers, but the whole point of the book is how he very much does not die. So you know, and this starts in Detroit in 2014. Had August Malloy not returned from the dead that morning in Detroit, the Malloy family line would have ended in the bathroom of a farm-to-table restaurant midway through lunch service. After the Narcan and the ambulance, he would pass this sanity check. Yes, August was his real, stupid name, and not the month, which was May. He was 26 years old. Barack Obama was the president. No, he wasn't trying to die. He just misjudged his tolerance. He'd been clean nearly 2 years if you didn't count, and he had decided not to. The shift drinks and occasional Xanax he bought off the sous chef. But his car wouldn't start that morning, and when the man on the crosstown bus asked if he was looking for something, he considered the day stretching in front of him and decided he was. He died this time, he'd later grow sure, because it felt different from anything else. It wasn't a euphoric swoon like at 16, back home in Flint, when he shot up for the first time in a pawn shop parking lot and the city narrowed to the microwaves and guitars gleaming in the window display. Then the clamor of his thoughts shushed, his fidgeting stilled, and gone was whatever his fellow dishwasher at Ponderosa couldn't define when she said, "I guess you're kind of funny, Gus, but you're so..." It wasn't a too quickly falling blackness either, like the first overdose, when his mother opened his bedroom door to release the cat scratching inside and found his lips bluing beneath the Sgt. Pepper's poster. Instead, in the stall, the trout smell vanished from his fingers, the 60 Soul playlist in the dining room shut off, and his heart stopped. Detroit was suddenly gone, as if one slide clicked through to another on a reel. August was standing on a grassy expanse. A flock of birds pecked around his feet, feathers a flare of copper. Beyond the birds, No houses, no people. Rolling grass and a gray sky slung with clouds. In the next stall, a lawyer from Grosse Pointe noticed August's scuffed boot kicked toward him at an unsuggestive angle. He tapped it with the toe of his Oxford, called, "You all right in there, buddy?" Bending, he saw August's white hand hanging, fingers pointing to the tiles. No idea what he took, the kitchen manager explained to the paramedics. The diners gawked from their microgreens as August was wheeled through the back door. At the front, the hostess held a finger under her bottom lashes to dam her mascara, elbow out as if she were saluting him. The kitchen manager calculated the comp meals, more in the ensuing Yelp reviews. "Line cook," he said, then added, "Flint guy," as if that explained it. Across from Henry Ford Hospital, where August, resurrected, stood smoking beside his sister, tourists snapped pictures in front of the Motown Museum's blue and white Hitsville, USA sign. He'd taken Annie there just a month ago, after their Mama's funeral luncheon. The suggestions, August, was impulsive and probably inappropriate. Annie had disappeared to deal with Rita, who'd shown up to prove that while she still didn't love Annie, she wouldn't have ended their engagement if she knew her grandmother was about to die. Their mama had been a difficult person, and attendance was scarce. The potato salad rose back up August's throat each time his mother reached out from beneath her grief to repeat, "Well, Gus is doing so well. That's something to be grateful for, isn't it?" August couldn't pull apart what shivered in his nerves, couldn't discern what was grief and what was shame. He felt for the cigarettes and keys in his pocket and left his mother with a huddle of second cousins nakedly calculating the debt the deceased had gone into on his rehab stints. Between the sets of doors, August collided with his sister. Rita's taillight swung out of the lot. With a rare wildness, Annie said, "Take me wherever you're going." He was only going to sit in his car and smoke, but he was always the one who needed to be shown an escape route. And so, touched, he devised a quick plan. "Follow me back to Detroit." When the guide tried to coax their group into dancing like the Temptations, August, still in his suit and tie, was the only one to acquiesce, dipping and snapping his fingers. Annie gasped with laughter. In the halls of costumes, before a shrine of Jackson 5, polyester, and fringe, August sang, "Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie?" He pointed to a sequined Supremes gown. "I'm gonna wear that to your wedding someday," he said. "That'll be my maid of honor dress." He regretted it immediately. Her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. He braced for her to repeat that she was going to die alone and unloved, and it wasn't fucking funny. Instead, she said, "You're way too shouldery for a halter." Added softly, "And you'll have to walk me down the aisle, you know. There isn't anybody else." Now, August ashed into a lilac bush, and Annie fussed with a defeated Kleenex. Hers was always the number he gave because, unlike their mother, she never cried in public, a skill he suspected she'd honed getting her master's in social work. By the time the call woke her, sleeping off the night shift at the women's shelter, she'd had the 60-mile drive from Flint to cry in her Honda, and her face, puffy with breakup grief eating, was splotchy. He hung on to this last moment before they got in her car, and he had to explain again that it was just this one time, that he didn't owe anybody money, hadn't even pawned anything. Annie balled up her Kleenex, dragged the back of her hand under her nose, and pulled a chapstick out of her hoodie. After she smeared it on, she said, "So, did your life flash before your eyes or whatever?" "I saw birds. Maybe they were chickens. I guess it was heaven." "Get fucked, Gus." Not like she meant it, but like she wanted to get back in her car and cry more. "No, I'm serious." He hooked a finger of his cigarette-less hand beneath his glasses to rub his eye. They'd been raised on Flint Public Library books and Joni Mitchell cassettes by an agnostic mother. They were goodish-looking, prone to solitude, and considered themselves too clever for their blue-collar lives. They were not heaven people. "Chickens," Annie repeated. "Think they were eating." "You work in a kitchen, Gus. You're probably cooking chicken right before." "No, trout. Friday fish special." An ambulance whipped past them. "Well, let's not tell Mom," Annie said. August bent to grind his cigarette out. He felt his sister watching him. The hospital bracelet shifted on the knot of his wrist bone. His glasses slipped to the end of his nose. He tapped out another cigarette and let it bob from his lips unlit. Maybe I can stay with you again. You're saying you want to come home? August couldn't tell yet whether he felt compelled to go home or if there was just nothing to stay in Detroit for. Home was where he circled back each time he did this. There was still a copper shine of feathers in his head, and he was a little nauseous. He slid the cigarette back into the pack. Well, can I? She turned her head, face pinched. She muttered insults to bolster her efforts in the fight against loving him. Of course you can, you stupid idiot. You asshole. Her shoulders twitched, then her arms extended, and he was in them. He hated the tremor of his sister's chin against his shoulder, the sudden smell of her hair, blonde like their mother's, and then the too meaningful eye contact when she pulled away, one hand still gripping him, as if he might float away if she let him go.
Whew. Ooh, okay, chills, Kelsey. That first chapter, honestly, it sucks you in. I know for me, and I know I just told you this earlier, but it felt like you get it. In terms of talking about Flint, writing about Flint. I've read a lot of work to where, it's about Flint. It can either be too negative or it can be too positive, too airy. You wrote this from only a Flint native's perspective. And it feels kind of funny saying that because, that first chapter, it does deal with, Gus's overdose. It does deal with the judgment of, he's a Flint guy. As if, that was supposed to explain it. And I've seen that a lot in my lifetime in Flint. You just get it. You nailed it. You captured what it feels like to really live in Flint, not be from Flint, but really live in it. And it can be bittersweet. It can be sad, melancholy. It can be stressful and very tense, but then it's the resilience of the people as well. You captured that phenomenally. So let's get into my first question. Gus, honestly, I'm more enthralled with his relationship with Monet in the book. Mm-hmm. What made you want to pair them together? There is kind of like an alliance between like the Black people in Flint and kind of the poor white people. I'm not sure if that's the angle that you were kind of approaching that from, but I felt like this is perfect. Like I've seen them before. I've met Gus and Monet. So why did you want to go that angle in the book?
Oh, well, first of all, I don't want to just start answering questions and not respond to all the incredibly kind things that you just said. Thank you so much for that. I mean, talking to you is like another Flintstone, but also your just credentials as a writer and your work in Flintside. That means so much to me to hear that from you. So I was very nervous about this living forever on YouTube, but now I'm like, I'm gonna go watch this just so I can hear Tia say that. Yeah, so the book originally, I had conceived it as this short story collection, and it followed these two families in Flint, but it was very chronological. It started with the sit-down strike, and it moved forward in time to the water crisis. And so the original draft of this, Gus and Monet were just in two stories at the very end. But as first I thought I was done with that book, and then as I was still processing it, kind of giving myself some space from it, I was thinking a lot about the characters of those last two stories. And at first I had in my mind of well, maybe there's a part two to this, maybe there's another book and it starts with them. And some of that is because they're based on people that are very close to me. There's a lot of myself in those characters. There's a lot of my experience as someone roughly Gus's age and someone who did their time in college, in my experience, volunteering at a farm on the east side when I was at U of M Flint. They were just the characters that stuck with me. And the longer that I worked on the book too, to go back to something you said, I started shifting into the novel maybe 2017-ish. And so it was like the water crisis had happened. And in some ways, the narrative, the like bigger national narrative of Flint had changed, but in many ways it hadn't. Like there was less humor. It wasn't like the Michael Moore thing where Flint was being used as a punchline, but it was being sort of gawked at as just like, can you believe this happened? Or can you believe people live this way? And for the first part of the water crisis, I was living in St. Louis, which was real weird in a lot of ways, but it was real weird to have this tragedy that was affecting my family. My mom was sick. I was coming home more and more. But in the first like shock of it, most of the news I was getting was from like the New York Times. And I remember reading a piece where they were talking to different folks, like at the Torch and at Buckham, like these businesses downtown, asking about like what the effect the water crisis was having on them. And there was this like line in the article that said, I'm totally paraphrasing, but the line was something like, the only people left in Flint are the people too poor to get out. And I don't want to diminish that. I think that is true for people. I was poor in Flint. I had a hard time in Flint. Like a lot of the work I did was, in those communities as well. And so I don't want to, again, like, I don't want to sugarcoat anything about Flint, but at the same time, like, I know people who are very ride or die about Flint. I know people who moved to Flint as adults, like chose to be there.
Yeah.
And so what felt really pressing to me, and I guess kind of political, was I didn't know anybody who was moving out of Flint, and I wanted to write a book about the people who choose to stay, the people who wouldn't go for anything. And I felt like, again, like it might seem weird like from the reading, that starting with this pretty grim opening, I think the book in my mind has a happy ending. And I also felt like that was sort of aspirational for me. It's like, I want to tell a Flint story about people who have so much stacked against them, but ultimately they're going to be okay. And they don't want to go.
Yes. And you did that wonderfully, honestly. Even the topic of addiction, right? Like, of course, that's kind of a running thing through the book, but then there's also, and this is what hit me, the addiction of Flint, because I lived in between California and Arizona for about 5 years. I came back last year to Flint willingly as an adult, and while I was living away from Flint, I found myself always coming back, and I thought it was being homesick. I'm like, oh, it's just homesickness. But after, like, while I was reading the book, and I believe, and it was a review, I want to say the New York Times review, congratulations on that. It was mentioned that Flint can be addicting. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't homesickness all the time. This city pulls you back a lot. And so the fact that, that also falls in line with the theme of actual drug addiction, I'm like, okay, this is perfect. But is that what you were going for while writing it? Or is that something that just makes perfect sense after the fact, like a Jordan Peele movie? Just makes sense to go.
I guess it's like a Jordan Peele movie, because I didn't think about that. But like hearing you articulate that, I mean, I'm someone who's very addicted to Flint. I'll probably still be writing about Flint and like talking about Flint until I die. You know what I mean? Like, I may never live there again, but I'm so fascinated with it. And I don't know why that is. I think maybe it's a couple things. I think in some ways, like, Flint can be a really hard place to live. So if I don't want to say this in like a toxic positivity thing of like, choose joy, but I think you do have to like kind of work to find the things that make you happy and the community that uplifts you in Flint. And once you like have put in the work and found those things, it's hard to remove yourself. And also I think, I guess Detroit is like this as well. And I see this in like the people I work with and my friends here now. But I think too, like when you're from Flint, you're like always like trying to reckon with like what your experience of living there versus like what you're constantly being told it's like to live there.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that for me, that like always that makes me so curious again, like to go back to that thing in the New York Times of like, well, wait, if I don't know anybody who's leaving, if my family's not leaving, like who is leaving, you know, like it makes me like just fuels my like curiosity about the history, about like the different sort of versions in Flint that people are simultaneously living in. It does make me like more sort of obsessed, I guess, or addicted to like Flint and the story of Flint.
Yeah, it's a wonderment. I remember when I was in college, I took a class at Baker one time, and a professor said, Flint is the only place I know where the people don't want to live here. Like they don't really like living here, but they will not leave. He's like, why is that?
I get that, yeah.
And
complain about it all the time, but
yeah. And
yeah.
I always wonder, like, why do I love this place so much? And I think it's community. Honestly, it's like soldiers. It's like no matter what oh my God, I was about to say brigade. Like I do not know any type of military lingo, but it's like whatever you were doing.
Brigade sounds good though. I don't know what it really means, but it does sound good.
But if you meet someone else that was from the Army, it's like it's kind of a connection there. It's like, oh, you've seen what I've seen. You've probably done what I've done, and I think that's what it is with us in the city. It's we feel like we've kind of been in a war together, and I feel like that's what you kind of included in CHEVY in the Hole. It's like, hey, this is what it's like to be here, but let me show you kind of, I don't want to say the cool factor of it, but it's like, let me show you the realness of these people. Let me show you the realness of where I'm from, how we talk. We talk pretty rough to each other. It's something that I didn't notice until I moved to California, and nobody was talking like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I would move back I would come back to Flint and kind of get my dose of like, saying words like chatty and
yeah,
I'm like, I'm home, and like, get out of my way, chatty. But that's what it feels like. And I feel like you definitely inserted that and let it live in the book. And I love you for that, Kelsey. Thank you. Like, seriously.
Thank you.
Okay. So, with us talking about the depressing things and addiction, let's talk about love.
Yeah.
Let's talk about love. I know you said earlier that you kind of just had like Monet and Gus kind of in separate stories. Did you mean to put a love story inside of CHEVY in the Hole, or kind of build a love, like a story around the love? At what point did you say, you know what, this needs some love?
Ooh, at what point did I say this needs love? That's such a good question. I'm trying to remember. I think that came pretty quickly because I was so interested originally in this idea of family history, and so interested like within that of not just like Flint's history, but how Flint has had a very different and simultaneously true history for different communities. And seeing how different people experience like the same moments in time, the same big events, and it has very different sort of impacts on their lives. And so when I like started like rewriting that original thing as a novel, and it started with Gus, I just became really interested in how that family history could be used to inform these ideas of like intergenerational trauma, or how much in our lives and in our relationships, we're like sort of carrying people we never met, like questions we never had answered, but how like certain problems or desires or how those things like carry forward and impact us and the choices that we make. So like having Monet, who's like carrying these ambitions, some of them thwarted, of the Great Migration, having her carrying this grief for her father, you know, the carrying the like legacy of injustice that's very real in Flint. And then Gus, who's coming from this family where there's been a kind of, there's a lot of addiction in his family history. There's a lot of fractured marriages in his family history. And it's not like things that he's thinking about much on the page, but there are things that are just like playing out in his experience of the world and just like being in his own skin all the time.
Yes. And isn't that a lot like life, to where you are going through all these things and then bam, love hits you?
This is very true.
I'm just going to ask a question pertaining to your overall thoughts of the book. What did you want the reader, the initial reader, to take away from Chevy in the Hole? Like, how do you want Chevy in the Hole to be perceived after someone has read it? Like,
I have two answers for that. Because when I was writing it, this maybe sounds like I'm being falsely like humble or whatever, but I really didn't think it would get published. Like at best, like if it came out with like an indie press, a regional press, that would be great. Especially like the first rejections I got were very dismissive about it. Like the whole Flint thing has had its moment. Nobody's interested in this. And these like some dismissive, very East Coasty kind of things about like, no market for this like small town story. So I really did feel like it was a book I was working on for me. And I think that got me through it. But when I knew the book was coming out, that it was gonna happen, what kept me excited about it was the idea. I really just wanted, like, thinking of as someone who loves books, just growing up with so few like representations of Flint or even Flint-ish places in literature, and the ones the few that there are often feeling like a betrayal, or like they're not entirely true or entirely accurate, or that they're exploitative. I wanted to write a book where, like, whether you like it or not, like as a Flint person, you can be like, she gets it. That is where I live.
yes.
And if you're not from Flint and you're reading it, I really, really hope that when you put down the book, you're like, oh, it's more complicated and it's more nuanced than I thought. Like, it's not just like GM left and a bunch of jobs were lost, and isn't that sad? And now these people drink terrible water. Those things are all true, but not. And so I want people to leave it with that more complicated understanding of Flint's history, but also feeling very defiantly like there is joy. Flint can be a place of like healing, joy, normalcy, even.
It's perception. It's switching perceptions. You can look at it as the worst place in the world. You can look at it as the best place in the world, but it's really about, your own perspective. Now, not to say that there isn't still the same kind of like issues that can, make life a little bleak, but it is definitely perception. Now, the water crisis, the inclusion of the water crisis without the actual crisis taking over the book, you are extremely clever for that, because I've seen, some authors actually in books about the Flint water crisis to where, or even if you mention it, it kind of makes your mind kind of wander elsewhere instead of sticking to the story. So you actually created this story during the water crisis. I'm not sure if we're still in the water crisis, but some people say we're not.
Yeah.
Some people say that we're in. But I thought that you setting it in the time zone, without letting it take over the story was great. Did you even think about that while including it in the story, or because you could have just left it out? You could have, but I like that you centered it without actually kind of making it the focus.
Yeah, thank you. Like in the just matter of weeks here that the book has been out, I've had a couple interviews, mostly in Detroit, and a question I've had is like, what needs to happen to fix Flint? And my answer is like, I don't know. And if I knew, it would be a very different book, or I wouldn't be writing a book. I'd be like running for mayor or whatever. So I think like some of that is my feelings at first. Like that story has already been told by people who are much smarter than I am. People like Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, who has written her memoir that's so wonderfully weaves in the history of Flint with her medical expertise on the lead effects in children and families. Anna Clark's book, The Poison City, about the water crisis and like the bigger picture of environmental racism and infrastructure in America, all that stuff. I'm a fiction writer. I just make stuff up. And so my interest is in the emotional lives of people and in families. So yeah, I didn't feel any pressure at all to tell that story, to give like how the water crisis happened or what it looked like in the early stages, how it was uncovered. All of that is so incredibly important. And I feel like I'm still learning about it. I had the great fortune of seeing Naira Sharif a little bit ago down here, and just I'm still like so grateful for the activism in Flint. But that's not me. I'm a fiction writer, and mostly I'm writing about my family and about love and about history. So yeah, aware of my own shortcomings.
I love that answer because it is what it is. It's like, okay, it is a water crisis that's happening, but Gus still needed a job, and things still needed to get done. Like life was still going on, and that's what it feels like as a Flint resident going through these things. And yes, it is a water crisis. It's like you still got to pay bills, you still got to work, you still got to move on. And so I maybe I answered the question for myself. Like you inserted it well without letting it overshadow everything, because that is what it is. It's just something that's happening in Flint, but it's not every day. It's not the totality of Flint residents' like life.
Right. Yeah.
So, oh my God. And I had another question. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of it without going through my notes. I'm trying to stay in the session. But CHEVY in the Hole, do you plan on writing another book? Not exactly CHEVY in the Hole related or a part 2, but can we get more work from you at this point, please?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I have a couple things. I've had this like nonfiction project that's been like on my back burner. I've been working on this book for like, I don't know, 6-7 years, but when I've had like playtime or just needed a break from it, I've been working on some personal essays around like, I was widowed really young. My partner died when I was 24, and I left Flint, bounced around, sort of homesick and weird and not doing so great, and then made the decision to move back. Yeah, so I've been working on this nonfiction thing about leaving Flint, coming back, and about family and about grief. I don't know that I have it like wrangled yet to say like that'll be my next thing. But it's something that's felt really good for me to work on.
Sounds good. Well, you have a groundbreaking book that I hope goes super far, even though that New York Times placement, that's amazing, Kelsey. But I want to way more, because this story is it's unlike any story of Flint that I've read in years. In current times, like it's just, I can't say anything else other than it's an amazing book. And I find myself, I'm still like working through certain parts. I'm revisiting parts because the chicken situation kind of threw me off. but
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing book all around. And I wonder, do we have any questions from the audience by chance?
Hi, yes, we do have a question about the role of music in your book. Would you be able to talk about, like, it seems like it came up a lot, and so would you be able to contextualize any of that for us?
Totally. And I would love to hear Tia's thoughts on this too, because like among the many things I admire about Tia's work is her music journalism. I mean, I don't have anything like profound to say about it besides like I'm really nerdy about music and I love music. But at the center of the book, music, like as it's moving through history, music like reappears as a kind of like set piece, but also at the center of the book, there is a record that came out the summer of '67, and it's in the book, it's a fictional band, but it's based on a real band of my mom's cousin. So my second cousin was in a band in Flint in the '60s. They put out one record that was a regional hit, and then
Grand Funk Railroad? Was it
oh
Grand?
my God, I wish I was related to somebody in Grand Funk Railroad. That would be way more Flint and cool. No, this band is called Soul Incorporated. And if you look them up on YouTube, they have a song called My Proposal that's kind of a banger. It's very like Motown, sort of swingy. But yeah, so they had this one song, and then later, like through YouTube, like record collectors, especially in England, who like, and DJs who build these like Northern Soul playlists, that record got found and sort of like brought up this family history in my family. So it just became like a device for me, both like fun because it's my like nerdy thing, but also like a way to play around in Flint history.
That's cool. That is super cool. And yeah, you know, I'm a self-proclaimed Flint historian. And so when you said that, that's why I'm like, was it Grand Funk Railroad? I want to say they had a song called "Do the Locomotion," and it was pretty big. But
yeah. Tia, do you have any like Flint music connections?
As far as what, because I'm connected to a lot of musicians. I was on the local music scene for a while here.
Yeah.
But not really a connection to her, like I'm related to anyone or anyone, like anything like that. But I'm just super enamored by anyone making music that just sounds cool here. I'm like, yeah, like we're a part of the world too. We can make some great music too, you know? So yeah, no relation though, no relation.
Yeah. Do you have anyone just like, if people were to leave this Zoom or like watch this on YouTube or whatever and like look up one Flint artist, do you have someone you would like recommend?
Yes. Jeff Sky. Look up Jeff Sky. And it's Sky is spelled Skigh. Jeff Sky has the most amazing visuals from a local artist I've seen like ever. Honestly, I don't know where he's getting this budget from, but he has amazing visuals that you really should check out. His music is amazing too. Jeff Sky, I feel like he's up next out of Flint. So, yes, cool. Yeah. And again, thank you. Yeah, I just want to. We're not ending this right now, I guess, but thank you for this. Like seriously, like
Yeah. My sister, she worked in restaurant service for a long time, and she worked at Captain Cody's over on the west side, and the dudes from Dayton family used to come in regularly. I never got to meet them, but that was my brush with the Dayton family. And then Tunde Olanaran rented the house across the street from my mom, so I used to hey, Tunde, who's now collabing with Yo-Yo Ma and is so incredibly,
he's amazing,
incredibly crazy. They used to be my mom's neighbor, but
yes, a lot of superstars we have in Flint, honestly, like our own little superstars, Tunde, John Connor, he did pretty well in the music industry. It's I don't know, I just have an infatuation with this local scene in particular because it's so much talent, but it's a lack of resources. So when people break through, it's like you did it. You found a way to break through, So
yeah,
always love for the local scene.
Totally.
Yes.
So we have another question about your writing process. Can you tell us what that looked like for you you mentioned at the beginning that this was originally going to kind of be short stories. But how did you kind of flesh out your novel, and what does that look like? Because you also teach. And so how did you find the time and the energy to do these things?
Ooh. I'm not one of those writers who I would like to be one of those writers who's I get up at 5 a.m. and I go for a brisk jog and then I write for 3 hours and then I start the rest of my day. Yeah, it's changed a lot. And honestly, mostly it's just been writing when I have the time. For part of the time that I was drafting this book was when my sister, who's doing amazing, but she was going through chemo and radiation, and I was her primary caretaker, the person driving her to appointments and stuff. So it was whatever time I had writing at the Henry Ford Hospital waiting room or writing in my car. Yeah, and then I did have the real writerly privilege of taking some time off when I knew I was getting close to the end of the first draft and was just really obsessed and excited about it all. And also scared and not really sure what I was doing. I was able to take a couple months of just working the bare amount to pay my part of the rent and devote myself really fully to it. And that was a lot of the writing. So yeah, I don't have a process, but I should get one. I would really like one. I'll also say I teach through Inside Out Literary Arts, which is a nonprofit in Detroit. I do that half of the week. I'm the writer in residence of an elementary school. So I work with all the 3rd and 4th graders. And then the rest of the week, I'm the co-director of a arts collective for women and non-binary and trans writers and artists. So I also have this amazing 24-hour space that at Room Project that I use to as a place to get out of my house and to focus.
Awesome.
I need that space. I need to visit that space.
Anytime. I know it's kind of a drive for you, but your honorary Room Project whenever you want to come down.
Yes.
So this question is for both of you, but what writers or works really inspire you?
You need some time, Kelsey. Should I just go first?
I have so many. You go first. I'll categorize them in my mind.
Ooh. I shouldn't have said anything because now I'm kind of drawing a blank. Aside from the greats, honestly, Stephen King, and not really for his, for the horror aspect, but just I read his autobiography called On Writing, and it actually helped me shape my writing process. I know you say you don't have like a official writing process. I don't either, but I have a structured kind of way that I write, which is you get everything down on paper and then you edit later. And then you also kind of take away, it's a thing called kill your darlings that he says. Mm-hmm. And he's pretty much like, don't fall in love with your characters. And so that's something I always take with me, even in journalism. Like, don't fall in love with fluffy language or, trying to make this sound like the best piece or read like the best piece, but just tell it how it is in the most authentic voice. And that's something that, Stephen King talks about in his book. So he's a great writer to me, and will always be. I can't really name anyone else other than like the Maya Angelou's, like the poets, Nikki Giovanni, like those are my go-tos, but nonfiction, fiction, Stephen King all day.
That's so interesting. I was just talking about Stephen King the other day with somebody. I haven't read a lot of Stephen King, and I don't know why I don't read more horror, because I watch a lot of horror movies. But I was just talking to somebody about like reading The Shining when I was too young for it, and it was like the first sex scene I ever read was in The Shining, where I was like, people do this to each other? Like, I didn't even know. I have pretty eclectic taste, but one thing I really love is like big family, like multi-generational epics. And I have a really soft spot for one set in Detroit. So like Jeffrey Eugenie's Middlesex, I really love. Angela Flournoy's The Turner House is another one that I will read and reread. The God of Small Things, Yagi Asi's Homegoing, I really love. Toni Morrison's work of just like family stories in the Midwest. Yeah, and then I also love a lot of like the first things I really loved when I started to like after I found out about sex through Stephen King when I was like a little older and reading like the canon, like the old white guy kind of stuff. I really loved Victorian novels and like Thomas Hardy, particularly Henry James, like those stories that are so, that don't mind being 700 pages long because they have to tell you who like everybody's grandmother was and how the family got their money or lost it or like where exactly their plot of land ended. Like I like to know all those details in a story.
That's great. Perfect descriptions is what.
That's amazing. Okay, so I have another question, and it is about the both of you are like very familiar with Flint, and we've talked some about Flint through our conversation tonight. But are there things about Flint that you wish people from the outside who aren't there, who might just be exposed to like the news coming out of, like the water crisis and others issues, like what do you want people to know? Like what takeaways do you want people to have about Flint, Michigan?
I mean, one thing I think is really important to me personally, because I feel the big story of Flint is always like whatever the next like sad thing that happens, and not to diminish the importance of the sad thing, but maybe Tia, this gets back to something you said earlier about the way Flint people talk to each other. I think Flint people are some of the funniest people I know. I think you have to have like an amazing sense of humor, and be willing to like make fun of yourself and make fun of where you live and make fun of all your friends. I think humor is a coping mechanism. Humor as like that like verbal sparring is that way of kind of like entertaining each other. I think that's a Flint thing. I also think weirdness. I don't mean that in like an exoticizing Flint, but there's like I think all the time about the Dort Mall. Like I would love I would love to set a book at the Dort Mall. And for people who don't know, it was like this, I think it was maybe, Tia, do you know, was it like the first mall in Flint? There used to be a Sears there on Dort Highway.
I don't know if it was the first mall. I know it was the first mall to have very peculiar statues and things inside of it, to where I was like, what does all of this mean? And
Yeah.
I would just only get the answer of, it's a mall. And I'm like, no, it doesn't look like this. So
yeah, like when I think most of that stuff's gone now, but like when I was coming up, and I'm sure you too, like it was used as, the guy that owned the place, there were barely any stores left in it, but the guy who owned a place was like crazy rich, and his passion project or whatever was collecting like old neon signs or like stormtrooper costumes from Star Wars, these like big like memorabilia auction kind of objects.
yeah.
And he would use the mall as this place to store them. So you could walk through and like, oh, there's a bike hanging from the ceiling that was in the Tour de France, or big old neon gas station signs, or like a diving bell. Just in the mall.
As weird as it can get. Yes, it was fascinating, actually. Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like people need to know that we have culture in Flint. We have our own culture here. To where, like, even our food culture, like, we love tacos. It's so weird. We love tacos. We love to fry our shells. I thought everyone in the world did it until I went to, I believe I was in California, and someone was like, "What are you doing to the shells? Like, just, put the shells in the oven and bake the shells." I'm like, "No, I'm frying them because I'm from Flint." And, and we just have different kind of just culture that keeps us all connected, and we carry our culture with us everywhere we go. Like I said, I was in California, like, "No, this is the way you fry a shell," and they're like, "What are you doing?" But our culture, it's a big thing. I want people to know that we're not, all super poor and drinking dirty water all the time. We're not showering. We're real people with jobs and missions, and we are funny, and we have big hearts. We work hard. It's a Midwest thing, and we all, like, in all of our individual towns in Michigan, we have our own little cultures that we're very proud of. So I want people to know about Flint.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and unfortunately we've reached the end of our time together. So again, Kelsey and Tia, thank you so much for joining us on At Home with Literati tonight. And thanks to our viewers as well. Make sure you buy the book. The link is in the chat and on the event listing that brought you here tonight. And of course, you can come into our store, and we'd be happy to put a copy in your hands. Thank you all so much for your support, and we will see you at the next event. All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Tia. This was fun.
Thank you. It was fun.
Good night.